welcome back. A recent skirmish between BC wineries and Alberta liquor underscores a real economic problem in Canada. There are still huge trade barriers in place between provinces. Estimates suggest they rob the national economy of $80 billion, suppress wages, hurt profit, and also, of course, hamper business productivity. Mike Holden is chief economist at the Business Council of Alberta. Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Thank you.
And the Business Council has done some work on this. In fact, some of that data I just listed comes from research that you've been behind. This is a huge problem. Alberta has been out in front, in fact, being kind of unilateral and dropping barriers where you can, because I guess you know it's good for business. I want to start with the most recent fight. Given that, why is Alberta Liquor kind of sticking its, drawing a line in the sand around BC wineries sending wine direct to consumers? Is this another example of a trade dispute that doesn't need to happen?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to interprovincial trade barriers, unfortunately, almost all trade disputes are things that don't need to happen. Typically, it's they exist because of a regulation that's in place or protecting a specific local industry or local market. And I think that's it typically is in cases like that where we see these interprovincial trade disputes arise. And as you said, Alberta has been good at reducing them. It's taken a leadership role. It has actually the fewest internal trade barriers of any province in the country, and its partners in the new West Partnership Agreement in BC and Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but have been at the forefront of that as well. But as you suggest, there's still work to be done.
What is the quickest way? And it's interesting, a lot of Canadians might not know that we have free trade agreements inside this country, that we actually have to sit down and negotiate deals that are called the Canada Free Trade Agreement. And could we get to some kind of future where it's just actual free trade, Mike? There are no agreements required. There's no barriers in place.
Unfortunately, doing that, I think, would be really hard. I mean, just to clarify, when we talk about internal trade barriers and free trade within Canada, usually when you talk about free trade outside of between countries, you're talking about tariffs or other barriers, whereas you're effectively paying an extra tax on goods that you import. It's not like that with interprovincial trade barriers. What these are either restrictions on what can be bought and sold. In the case of liquor, for example, restrictions based on sort of technical regulations, and you can think about transportation and the load limits on roads, or the number of tires that are on a transport truck, for example, or the ability for people to move from province to province and have their credentials recognized. So there's a whole range of really small irritants, and it's all these small irritants that add up. And unfortunately, stamping out each and every one of them is a pretty difficult task.
So what is the best approach? Because the research you've done, and we see it elsewhere, is we are hurting ourselves. Even when the protection feels in the short term as though it's a good thing, it's saving jobs or it's creating, a protection around an industry locally, it long term hurts the jobs and the industry. That's clear. How do we get that message across and persuade folks to drop the barriers and actually just compete?
Well, I think that it's a conversation that we need to have with provincial governments across the country. All of these barriers are within provincial jurisdiction. There's not much that the federal government can do really beyond convening and trying to facilitate these kinds of discussions, which it did with the Canada Free Trade Agreement. And so, there's a role for the federal government to play there, but really it's up to each of the provinces to come to the table and agree that they can agree to start working on these problems one at a time. And the real challenge is that, there's a couple. One is that the provinces themselves aren't necessarily eager to relinquish some of their own jurisdiction or some of their own ability to make these kinds of rules. Mm-hmm. And then the other is that, as with all trade agreements, the benefits are widespread and thin, but the costs are isolated and deep. So, if you've got, if you have 100 people in an economy and everybody earns $100, these kinds of trade agreements would see 99 people be $1 richer and one person be $50 poorer. And so you can imagine who's going to have the biggest voice when it comes to complaining about the results of that.
Interesting. Mike, I fear we will be speaking again. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
Mike Holden is chief economist at the Business Council of Alberta. Time for the takeaway and fiddling while Rome burns. The federal summit on auto theft has come and gone, and anyone hoping for concrete action to combat what is a growing scourge across this country was disappointed. To be fair, the feds don't actually own the parts of this file that are closest to the problem. Policing in municipalities is where that would be. What the feds can control all feels like bolting the barn doors long after the horse is gone. It's all very well to track down cars and containers about to be shipped overseas, But the owners would probably prefer their cars stayed in the driveway to begin with. And tougher penalties for the criminals terrorizing Canada's neighborhoods is fine. But last we checked, most car thieves don't review the criminal code before deciding to go to work. Bottom line, Canadians have a right to feel safe in our homes and an expectation that our property is safe. How did we get here? One obvious place change must happen is the technology in the cars themselves. Manufacturers and insurers are already implementing adaptations that make it harder for a vehicle to be stolen, but progress is slow, and meantime, people and property are under threat. More visible presence from police may sound like an obvious place to start, but overstretched city budgets have made policing thinner, not more robust. That has created a wave of theft that amounts to one vehicle stolen in this country every 5 minutes, and alarmingly, left some neighborhoods planning to take action on their own with private security. That dark outcome should feel terrible to all of us. Law and order is often used as a kind of political cudgel, with the right lining up on one side and the left on the other. But in this crisis, we have something we can all agree on. A stable and reliable place to live and work is surely the most basic thing a government can provide for its citizens. My takeaway? Some problems are best solved with first principles. Figuring out how to respond after an illegal act has taken place feels a long way from that. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.